Hey guys, welcome to New Digs. Today we're going to talk about spring in the northwest corner of Connecticut. And for any of you who garden in a four-season climate like we do, you are familiar with the fact that spring can be extremely unpredictable. Just last week we had a day in the 80s, and last night the overnight temperature here dropped down to about 37 degrees. So spring can have these major shifts in temperature. We are on Mother Nature's schedule. She is not on our schedule. So speaking of that, we want to talk today about some concepts, gardening concepts, that are related to cold and when you can start to work in the soil, when you can put out tender plants so that they won't be nipped by the frost. And we also want to talk about what are called USDA hardiness zones. This is a numerical system that basically lays out what the minimum temperatures are where a plant can thrive. That was our peacock Virgil weighing in, and so I'm sure he'll be part of the antics as we go on. So we're talking hardiness zones, and I want to zoom in on one word from the definition I just gave you, and that word is to thrive. Many plants in a given zone can survive, but will they thrive? We here in the northwest corner are labeled as zone 5, and that means the low temperature around here is about minus 20. That's the lowest the temperature should get. So plants labeled zone 5 should be able to manage not only to survive but to thrive in that climate. However, that's not always the case. For example, Jill was sharing a story that she bought a particular hydrangea, this beautiful variegated hydrangea, and I know the one she's talking about. She planted it in her yard, it bloomed the first year, and after that, nary a blossom. She gave it to a friend who put it in their garden one town over, but in a slightly warmer microclimate, which we just talked about. That hydrangea thrived. It blossomed, and it did not in Jill's garden. So it's that subtle difference. So even though both of those gardens were zone 5, the microclimate in the garden where the plant went to live was more suitable for it. Plant hardiness zones are measured from zone 1, which is the coldest, down through zone 12, which is the warmest. We mentioned that here in northwest Connecticut, we are zone 5. Well, the next question becomes, how do you know what zone a plant is? And when you go to a garden center, perennials, like these guys here that are waiting to get tucked into my garden, will have a tag that's either stuck inside the pot or pasted on the side of it. This also goes for trees and shrubs as well. And on those tags, there's a ton of great information. We'll actually make a video about the information you can find on these plant tags at some point later. But for now, you can find the zone on the back of these tags. Sometimes the word zone is actually used. So it will say, like in the case of this little anemone here, that it will thrive in zones 4 through 9. So it's a range. We are zone 5. So therefore we fall neatly into that range. And this plant would also thrive a zone colder than we are, zone 4, and further south of us, all the way down to zone 9. Places this plant would do well. The word zone isn't always used, and sometimes is in the case of this little gentian here, it will simply tell you a temperature range. So here it said this is hardy to minus 40 degrees, which is kind of amazing. Here, zone 5 is minus 20 degrees. So we know that this little unassuming plant could practically thrive in the Arctic tundra. And we know too that, as we were mentioning with microclimates, that on our properties, there are places that are going to be a little colder and wetter and less protected. So a plant like this that can thrive to those colder temperatures would be a good fit for an area like that, assuming that the sunlight is correct for it as well. We're here in my new shade bed that was just put in last year, and we want to talk about two concepts. One is when the soil can be worked in the spring, and that's relevant in a four-season climate where we get some cold temperatures. And the second idea is the idea of microclimates that's related. So when the soil can be worked basically means for gardeners when you should be first putting your hands in the soil to clear away debris, to start planting seeds. The soil has to be both warm enough and dry enough to do that. If you start playing around in the soil before the soil is warm enough and dry enough, you risk compacting the soil, and that's something we don't want. You don't want big clumpy soil. If you look down this bed, it was all put in at the same time last year, and you notice many of the same plants, you will notice, are at this end of the border and that end of the border, but they're at very different stages of growth. And that's because there are microclimates. So for example, the soil could be worked earlier in this end of the garden bed than it could be in that end of the garden bed. So here, this is perfect for working in the soil. If you can see, I can pick it up. You have beautiful tilth. This is called tilth. It means that the soil is loose, it's not clay, it's not soaking wet. I can dig in it, plant seeds, clear around perennials. If we walk down this way, I'm going to show you the difference a microclimate can make in when the soil can be worked. So just now, we were in this area, and we're going to walk down this new bed that we put in last year. You'll see, as we get down here, we have daylilies, had daylilies down there. We've got hosta, we had hosta down there. But as Jill said, it's almost like an ombre effect, so that we see the green fading less and less and less until down here, in this section of the garden, it appears that there's almost nothing coming up. And that's because these are two separate microclimates, and it has only to do with tree cover. That's the only difference. And I'm going to show you here, we were just talking about when the soil can be worked. I'm going to show you here that I really shouldn't be dabbling in the soil here because it's still a little too wet and cold. Here, the soil was probably frozen until 10 days or so ago. So take a look. And we said if the soil should not be worked, that's my peacock Virgil, you'll get to know him well, that when I squeeze it, it stays in a ball. It stays in a wet ball, and this is not good because it's compacting the soil. We want nice tilth, as we said. We want the soil to crumble. It's not doing that here because it's still too wet. So technically, these plants, these perennials, are having to work pretty hard to get up through the soil because it's still pretty wet for this time of season. So here I would say soil is not really ready to be worked. I shouldn't be planting any annuals, for example, here, as opposed to down there.